Welcome to our SHIFT Summit 2023. We're going to be talking about digital collaboration. If you had asked me 20 years ago, would I be talking about digital collaboration? I would have said, hell no. So we can probably start off by just thanking the pandemic. And really, truly, I think one of the best ways to start any meeting is a bit of gratitude. And so I just want to first send out some gratitude to the SHIFT team for taking another flyer on another virtual event. I don't know how many of you have pulled off virtual events in the last couple of years, but sometimes they have a tendency to be a hit or miss. And so this one is shaping up to be, I think, a hit based on some of the participation and just some of the folks that I know that are here. I also just want to say thank you to our community. We didn't do a paywall. This was not meant to be a public session today. This is really about our community of clients, both past and present. This is about our collaborators, our partners. There's a lot of dear, dear, dear friends that are sitting on this here today, and you know who you are. So thank you for being here. And let's have a great session here about digital collaboration. So I think one thing, although we've been doing this digital collaboration, all of us, for the last 3+ years, human beings for the last 3 million years have been trying to figure out how to collaborate. We're social creatures. And I think it's probably not lost on any of us that for the past 3 years, it does feel like history is happening. It's been a bit of a wild ride, triggered certainly by the pandemic, and the second and third order effects really kicked in. For example, work. On March 16th, 2020, as many of you know, a lot of the folks that are allowed to work in office environments were allowed to work from home. And it took this slow transition for the last 30 years. Companies like Gallup and a lot of the big management consulting firms have been pressing the more button on employee engagement, which to me is just a fancy way of saying, how do you treat your people like humans? And so all of a sudden that had been happening for decades. And then next thing you know, we've got this pandemic where everybody's working from home, and it became sort of a fast transformation. And I think the question that everybody's trying to wrestle with, which is how do we effectively as human beings do this thing we call working collaboration across both time and space? And I think it's been a little bit of an exhausting sort of experience, and for us, at SHIFT, I feel like in some ways we've been waiting for this moment our whole lives, because we just had been talking to, a lot of executive leaders about giving their people freedom within a framework. And so what you will get today from us is over the last 3+ years, we have surveyed no less, you can write this down, 30,000 plus humans. We have literally worked with hundreds of organizations, executive leaders alike. And everybody, in my sort of humble estimation, is wrestling with this one question. How do we get everyone on the same page without scheduling more meetings? How do we get everybody rowing in the same direction? How do we get everybody singing from the same sheet of music? How do we harmonize those pieces? And I think in a lot of ways that one of the easiest ways to sort of have this conversation is to look at history. And so one of my favorite things about history is that humans have the ability to meet the moment. We typically find a way. And one of my favorite stories, buckle up, is about horse poop. How many people love horse poop? Horse poop sounds good, right? Thank you, Liz. I know, like a little horse poop. Who doesn't like horse poop on February 2nd, 2023? So back in London in 1894, many of you know this story. All the experts came in and said, holy crap, literally. The streets are going to be filled with crap over the next 50 years. There's too many horses pooping in the streets. There's going to be 9 feet of manure sitting in the streets. That's what the experts said. And so what they didn't realize is they didn't understand how fast our energy sources can change. And so I think just as human beings, one of the conversations we'll have today is just like, as much as this is about digital collaboration, we're still stuck in collaboration, folks. And so this visual to me is one of my favorite. I've been using this slide for almost 10 years. And on the left side, this is basically the Easter Day parade in New York City on 5th Avenue. And on the left side, what you'll see is one motor vehicle in 1900. So remember, 1894, all the experts said, hey, we're going to have manure, literal horse poop in the street. No one's going to be able to walk. And you can see why. It was just a lot of horses pooping in the street. Now, fast forward 13 years later, same Easter Day parade, same street in New York City. And what you'd have a hard time doing is finding, a horse and carriage. In fact, this particular picture, you only see one. And so folks, like, if you're not willing to just sort of take a step back and acknowledge it and recognize that for 3 million years, we've been learning how to get along. And for 3 years, we've been trying to figure out how to get along from a digital collaboration perspective. And I think this quote really sums it up, that there are really decades where nothing happens, and then all of a sudden it feels like there are weeks where decades happen. And I think it's a good way to sort of start this conversation because, look, at the end of the day, the thing that sort of brings us all together are these challenges that we're facing as executives, as entrepreneurs, as leaders. And I will just call out sort of 3 ways that I interpret all of the data that we're facing right now as organizations. The first is dissonance. So the dissonance that we as leaders feel with our teams has never been more stark. In fact, if you look down here under remote and hybrid, you'll see that 87% of employees report that they're productive at work. Now, this is key, but only 12% of leaders find that their teams are productive. Just think about that for a second. So 87% of employees feel like they're doing what they need to be doing. And on the other side, leaders are thinking it's about only 10%. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2, we've been working on this one for decades too, which is employee engagement. It has never been lower. How's that for uplifting and inspiring on a Thursday? So folks right now are really struggling with this idea of, we're calling it a new name, quiet quitting. Now, it's the same thing that it's been all the time, which is people don't feel fired up to show up on Mondays. And one of my mentors and investors, he happens to be on the call right now. I just saw him. Hey, mister. He had this concept called Happy Mondays, where it was like, hey, how do we get people looking forward to Mondays instead of those Sunday scaries? And then this third piece makes it even more sticky, which is we as human beings have this resistance to change. Okay. And so this is an issue, which is like we're thrown in, not into the pot with the frog and the boiling water. Now, this thing was scorching hot as of March 16, 2020. And everybody's trying to figure out, again, how do we get people on the same page without scheduling more meetings? Now, for me, as a sort of a teacher and a trainer, I can tell you this is all full circle. I'm feeling like the old guy, but I still feel like the same kid that started this thing when I was 23 years old, which was I walked into these rooms when I was 22 years ago, just fudging on the age here. And I remember going, okay, so we're going to talk about leadership or collaboration or change management. Okay. And everybody would just sit there and listen. And I'm like, why are you guys not like writing stuff down? Why are you not like participating? Haven't you read a book about adult learning or how things get integrated or applied? And for the record, there are a lot of different academic research papers that will tell you that basically more or less, if you just listen to what I'm going to talk about today, you're going to remember 10%, period. It takes you back into sitting in class. It's not a fun experience. And how many of us, when we're running virtual meetings, are doing just that? Second, jump all the way down to 70% of what you say and what you write. So the reason I'm asking you to take notes today, the reason that you're actually going to participate and play, the reason I'm going to put you in breakout sessions, which, by the way, we've locked the doors. You can't leave the Zoom, so you've got to stay here. You've got to participate. You've got to play. It's because we've invited some amazing human beings here. And quite frankly, I'm not the only one that you're going to learn from today. So really, when you think about, again, virtual collaboration, this is not just about asking people to listen. It's not about asking them to take notes. You've got to find a way to get them on the field and play. Because right now, the flow that we're going to take you through today over the next 2 hours really starts with the digital mindset. We're going to talk about digital culture, digital communication, and digital meetings. And what I will tell you is we could talk about some of the latest and the greatest stuff in the world. But if you're not really fully engaged, there is some irony to us holding a virtual summit about digital collaboration and none of this stuff sticking. So I'm going to ask for your indulgence today. That's right. So I can't see everybody on the screen here for a quick second, but why don't we just do this? So if you'll just indulge me, we've got about 45 or so folks. If you can go on camera for a quick second. What I'd love for you to do is, can you just do me a solid? Would everybody just stand up for a quick second? Hey, look at this. We can stand. If everybody could just if we were in a room together today, I would say, can we just lift our hands up and do a little stretch to the right, a little stretch to the left, maybe take a big deep breath. I mean, I don't know. The last thing we should all be doing are back-to-back Zoom meetings where this is just not fun. I mean, again, we get one shot at this, Johnny, and I think we should do something a little different. So that's sort of the talk here, if you will, in terms of just getting people active and engaged. Now, that's just not enough. It's just not. So what we're going to ask that you do here is I want you to just contemplate this question, which is, what's preventing you from being 100% present today? I want you just to think about that. You came into today's meeting, it's in the middle of the day. Good job, shift. Usually, by the way, these operate better in the morning, but when you got people from all over the country, it's not going to happen that way. My assumption is not everybody's going to leave today's meeting and go play your favorite round of golf or pickleball or go to yoga. Like everybody's got stuff to do today. And so, the proverbial lots of tabs open on your computer tend to be how we ran things, again, before the pandemic. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask Julie to help me with this today, which is we're going to put you in breakout rooms of 4 people. I'm going to give you 5 minutes. I'm going to ask that you introduce yourself and then just open up. You can decide to play fully. You can decide not to play fully. But what I will tell you is you will likely learn a lot in the first 15 minutes of today's session about digital collaboration if you just lean in with your shoulder to this one. And so what I will tell you, if I had to go, I'd be like, hey, my name is Joe, and everybody can say hi. We can make it that kind of meeting if you want. And you could say, hey, one of the things that's preventing me from being 100% present is, my kids have a really big basketball game on Saturday. Last year we kicked butt, won the championship. This year we didn't. I'm the coach, by the way, and I feel really bad about it. I'm like, I got to get better plays. And so that could be something on my mind, right? Whatever it is that you're bringing to the table, just open up and have a conversation with it about your, what's keeping you from being 100% present. So we're going to do 5 minutes, quickly, rapidly. You're going to be in groups of 4, and we'll see you in about 5. Julie? As we're welcoming everyone back, I hope you had a chance to spend some time with some really amazing human beings. If you didn't have a chance to spend any time with an amazing human being, could you just put it in the chat that maybe next time we'll group you with a better person? Can you do that for me? Just to make sure we don't have any duds here. Let's see if anybody's got the guts to do that in the chat. All right. So listen, today is not going to be polished. Today is not meant to be perfect. Today is really meant to have a real human conversation about how do we take, again, these physical attributes and these physical traits of how we show up in, the workplace, but how we show up in this virtual space and really do something different with it. So the first piece we're going to talk about is digital mindset. And what I will tell you is that, with all the conversations that we've had with clients over the last 3 years, one that continues, I think, that we wrestle with a lot of clients is they're still trying to put what they did physically in the digital space. So for example, we have a lot of clients who, CEOs and executives who weren't really good at email. So they didn't respond to people in email. They didn't go overboard with emojis and Slack and that kind of that energy that didn't feel like the way to collaborate before the pandemic. But post the pandemic, when 50 to 70% of us are spending a lot of time more virtually than not, it's time to update our skills. It's time to update our digital fitness. And I think there's no better way to sort of say this than again, there are a lot of old ideas that we've all been operating with, and I think we can think a little differently about them. So back to history, many of you know what this is. Many of you might know the background because you've seen our TED Talk. And so, I open up my whole TED Talk with this story about the typewriter. In 1868, Charles Skoll was an American inventor, and he invented this thing that you're staring at right now. There was only one problem. The initial prototype had all of the keys arranged in the A through Z pattern, folks. It worked so well, people were typing so fast that it broke all the time because you didn't need a typing class to figure out how to use this thing. So this guy spent the next 7 years making all of our lives miserable. He found the most complex configuration of the keyboard. We now call it the QWERTY keyboard. So for 143 years, we've all been typing slower and not faster, definitely harder and not easier because, again, we've not been willing to challenge the assumptions that we've been given. Now, the reason that we have this issue as human beings, when we think about, again, the way that we show up, there's a great book called Immunity to Change. I read this 5 or 6 years ago, but I just happened to be in Costa Rica 3 weeks ago and heard this guy speak, Robert Keegan. And more or less, when you think about the way that your organization is digitally collaborating or not, it's about the immune system. It's about the underlying currents and assumptions that are not being tested or tried. And so if you've not picked up this book, I would highly recommend it. If you're in the position of change management, trying to get everybody on the same page without scheduling a new meeting, this is an excellent read. And as I said, it's about legacy thinking, that the idea that the past equals the future. A lot of us that's the way that we show up. And we've done this in the past, folks. I mean, if you remember, there was this thing called the internet back in the mid to late, 90s. There was all of this fear and resistance that this was going to collapse. It was just a fad. It wasn't really going to sort of show up this way. And isn't it funny? We'd look at these headlines now and we'd laugh. Well, it's no different than when we look at the headlines about having 5 or 6 generations in the workforce, about how Generation Z, we're going to find out later in the presentation, are talking about slaying work and how you might be a bussin' boss. All of these things are our opportunity to sort of update the software because, at the end of the day, we all operate from a series of biases. And, this is one of my favorite things to always open up and talk about. If you've seen any of our trainings or our workshops, I talk a lot about, Danny Kahneman, who wrote the book Thinking Fast and Slow. He won the Nobel Peace Prize back in 2002 with a guy named Amos Tversky. And they won the Peace Prize because it was the first time in economic theory that people started talking about the idea that you don't make decisions that are always in your best interest. You just don't. And the reason you don't is because we all have these biases. And so specifically, the idea that we all operate from a place of knowing of the things that we know. Now, some of us have grown our self-awareness and are willing to acknowledge the things that we don't know. But what I will tell you is that third bucket, the stuff that you don't know, is really where we should be all leaning into more curiosity than judgment. And from a digital collaboration perspective, we're so focused right now on the tools, the systems, the techniques. Back to full circle moment, this was the first framework that we developed 20 plus years ago when we went into leadership conversations with folks. And we were like, hey, this is how you collaborate. This is how to think about your culture. We were like, great. If you want a result, and just because I often talk about New Year's resolutions and it still happens to be early in the year, if you would set a result to be healthy, to quit smoking, to spend more time with your family, generally speaking, we look at the process first. We go, what's the diet? What's the gym? What's the pill? What's the hypnosis? What are the things to sort of lean into that are going to help me basically short circuit, shortcut, find the hack to get to that place a little faster, stronger, or better? But when in fact, it really does come down to your mindset. So your attitude, if you will, around digital collaboration. This isn't whether you play video games, you don't need to be a gamer. But I will tell you that a lot of leaders that we talk to, survey after survey comes back. And again, they kind of are putting up these walls of like, well, it's just not me. It's not how I did it. I am who I am and I'm not willing to change. I mean, these are not helpful conversations. And if you want to unpack this even more about the digital mindset, I wrote about this in my book, Shift the Work, around, look, it's more than just mindset. Simon Sinek did a great job with the why, and we believe wholeheartedly that you need to find leverage and an intrinsic motivation to do these things. But you also can look at this from the vantage point that our bodies are complex. We have actually more brains than just the one in our head. And so the first one is the one in your head that really kind of ciphers out, discerns priority. And the best way to sort of think about this is like, is life happening to you or for you? Think about the pandemic. How many of us, when it first got going, were like, I cannot believe this is happening to me, to us, to all of us. And I'm not saying it hasn't been hard. It's been incredibly hard, but it wasn't the Spanish flu. It wasn't some past, sort of moments in history. And what happens when drama ensues, particularly collaboration digitally? I mean, how many of you have gotten a text message or a Slack or a Teams message from someone and you felt like they were yelling at you instead of like wanting to talk to you? And again, like our ability to really sort of look at behavior, not as intent, is incredibly important, because when we start judging intent, we start falling into this drama triangle where we're thinking that there's an oppressor, there's a bully, I'm a victim, I need to save the day. And so these questions are just beginning questions to kind of get that mindset right of like, what's really going on here? And beyond just thinking about this in a heady kind of intellectual way, there's also an emotional way. How many of us, honestly, I mean, just be honest, are really thinking about like, I can't wait to respond to all my emails later today? Like, is anybody saying I get to respond to those emails, or are we saying we have to? Right? How many of us are excited about like our next 6 Zoom meetings? Like, just catch yourself in your language. Are you having to do these Zoom meetings, or are you getting to? Because energetically, as you're kind of coming into this whole conversation with like a get to mentality, what I would ask you and sort of encourage you to do with your team is ask them, like, what could be great about today's Zoom meeting? What are the things that we're grateful for? Like, maybe you could just go around the Zoom in the room and just have conversations with people that are real conversations that we used to do in person. Sometimes right now with these Zoom meetings, and particularly asynchronous collaboration, is we're just transacting information back and forth, and it's lacking so much of what really fills our cup. By the way, this is a picture of my sister who was a nurse during this whole pandemic. And so it's just a nice little tip of the cap to all of our first responders, all of our frontline workers, because again, a lot of us wouldn't be here without them. Now, there's one sort of final stage from my perspective around digital mindset that I would just want to like introduce here, which is, look, human beings, we're wired in kind of a funny way. We don't like to be eaten by the bear. We've been chased by that proverbial bear for millions of years. So we have a bit of a radar, right, in our amygdala and in the way that we sort of see and sense danger. And so a lot of times new things, we sense that as danger. We actually put up resistance as opposed to realizing that this is a moment to build our resilience. Okay, now look, I am no different. I was not like fired up to become a digital master or to build my digital fitness through this whole pandemic, but that just is what it is. And so I think to kind of round out the conversation here around really, what are the things from a leadership mindset that are going to move the needle? I think it comes down to three things. So if you're a digital leader, you're attempting to get people on the same page without scheduling more meetings, here's the invitation. The invitation is to think about these three ideas. So first, awareness of your aversions. We're going to unpack that here in a second. Second, a really, really amazing book, and actually several that have been written about adversity and how do people show up in this sort of digital landscape collaboratively and welcome adversity. And then brass tacks. Look, I don't want this just to be me speaking to you, like we talked about this today, which is, you know, for you and we to have a collective conversation today and sort of co-create a little bit about how we might want to do this moving forward. It's about how do we align our actions. And I would just say that, you know, I meet a lot of executives over the last 20 years. One of my favorite questions to ask them is like, how do you know where to spend your time? It is our most precious resource, our most precious resource. But most of us sort of just like mechanically, almost unconsciously walk into the week without really good practices of how you're spending your most valuable resource, your time, your energy, your effort, your focus. And so we gotta, I think, refresh, not a Stephen Covey sort of time management conversation, but we gotta refresh and go, wait a minute. If 50 to 70% of our time is spent collaborating digitally, so then how does that really show up in my week and what does that look like? So the first piece, you know, as I talk about the mindset, as I talk about your head, heart, and gut, and as we talk about this awareness of your aversions, just for a second, you know, I will just say to you that, you know, one of my aversions is I'm not a very good typer. I didn't learn how to do it. So thanks to Charles Skoll, I was, that QWERTY keyboard kind of did me in. Second, I'm not very good with the English grammatical correct way of saying things all the time. And so one of my fears with digital collaboration is that I'm going to sound like an idiot. Am I in the right room? Does anybody else feel like that the written word is not your first area of competence in terms of communication? Does anybody else have that sort of feeling? And so one of the things I think it would be important as we're digital leaders leading our teams through this exercise is just to get really honest and clear about what are the things that we're scared of. So if I can ask that you participate with me for a second, and I'll give you the backstory here in a minute. I see a few of you laughing at me holding the snake, which I'll give you the background in a second. Just throw it in the chat. Like, what are the things that you are avoiding as it relates to digital collaboration? What are the things that you do have a little bit of, like, I wouldn't say existential fear as what you see in this picture here with me, but what are the things that just don't necessarily light you up about digital collaboration? For those that don't know, my mom was bitten by a snake. And so I had this story growing up, like that snakes were terrible. Plus, I mean, let's be honest. I mean, I'm positive there's a snake lover on the call, but most of us are probably not like fired up to go spend a lot of time with snakes that are not in cages. And so right before the pandemic got going, I decided to like get over my fear. We did a big meeting, we brought in snakes, and that was the first time I've ever held a snake in my entire life. So I was a grown adult. I was attempting to, you know, show my kids that you should face your fears and not run from them. Failure in receipt of expectations. Thank you, Jesse. Anybody else have some aversions to digital collaboration that you'd be willing to name and claim? Like I didn't know it was that kind of meeting. Yes. Hey, Wendy. Just information overload, for sure. Being misunderstood. Love it. How many of you feel like when you send out a really amazing email or Slack and you don't get a response, that's like one of the most, disappointing moments of it's like when you tell a joke and nobody laughs, right? Like you send these things out into this virtual ether, and then all of a sudden it's like if a tree falls in the forest and no one's there to hear it, did it make a sound? Being ignored. Yeah, I love it. Hey, Alana. So I know this is taking a little bit of a different twist, but I will say that if you're not willing to look at this, and I think from an organizational perspective, remember I said the dissonance between leaders who think their teams are productive and teams who feel like they're productive right now is pretty wide. It's probably as stark as I've seen in 2 decades. And I think we just need to keep talking about the idea of literal trauma that people have gone through over the last 2+ years, that we as leaders are not just dealing with what people do during the day, we're dealing with the past, their whole lives. We're dealing with mental health. We're dealing with, the idea of like, what does it mean to be well again and whole? And I think, again, if you've not done any reading on just trauma itself, Gabor Mate, tends to be a really, really great resource. He's a PhD that talks a lot about this. And, one of his traumas and his addictions was to classical music. And he's a medical doctor. He's got a really interesting story about that. So give him a double click if you're into that kind of thing. So from a leadership and digital mindset, yes, facing your fears, talking about mindset, talking about like, you get to do this, you don't have to do this. These are all really great tools or great angles to come into the conversation. But the next piece to me really is about how do we appreciate adversity? Now, when I say appreciate adversity, what I mean is like, I will tell you over the last year, specifically, as we've reemerged from this COVID cocoon, people are out and about. We're now doing both physical and digital meetings. We're now having conversations with people. I don't know about you, but it feels weird that only a year ago we were all masked up and now we're just walking around in stadiums and train stations and airports. And it's almost like a bad nightmare that it never happened, but in some ways it did. This idea of appreciating adversity moving forward, it's a different level of crisis. And if you study crisis and leadership and just the way human beings show up, we just had this big pandemic, so everything else is going to seem sort of small and trite, but it's not. And so I'm going to go back to the idea, is life happening to you or for you? Some of you know my story of, I went to 23 funerals by the time I was 23, and it took me a good decade and then some to work out the fact that it didn't happen to me, it happened for me. And I think from an organizational perspective, we woke up January 2021 as a business. We lost 70% of our business in a very quick phone call. That did not feel great. 3 weeks later, we bought a tech company, which was, we'll decide later how the history books are written about Shift and where we're going. It was like we doubled down in our most vulnerable moment. And again, I think it was a moment where our team rallied and really felt that this was happening for us, not to us. And there's a really great book by a guy named Jonathan Haidt, who, if you're not familiar, he's one of my favorite authors. He's written a bunch of books: Coddling the American Mind, The Righteous Mind, which I think was a really good one. And the last one was called The Happiness Hypothesis. In the happiness hypothesis, he basically breaks this down and he says, look, adversity does 3 things. And again, digital collaboration right now, I will tell you, is really the bane of a lot of executives that are trying to figure this out, which is right now, how many of you have an older family member who 3 years ago didn't know what Zoom is, but now does? Like they Zoom with you all the time, right? So what adversity does, if we welcome it in, is it helps us understand our hidden abilities. We have a bunch of them. Like you have things that you haven't even thought of yet. If you've had a chance to play with ChatGPT or Midjourney or all these cool AI tools, like our creativity, the human ingenuity, like we were just about to get this started. Joe, you're not the older family member. I'm sorry, not happening. A second piece that adversity really does, and again, if we think about digital collaboration, I think about it this way, which is like, who are our real relationships? I think one of the things that's important as we think about this is that there's a lot of downside with digital collaboration. Like I've been talking to, we have, Eric and I have 2 kids, 12 and 10, and, they're starting to think about technology. They have screens, and we're like, listen, it doesn't feel like it, but everything you do digitally is permanent. Just newsflash, unless you're recording today's conversation, everything I'm saying is not permanent. That is a massive difference. And so as we think about the reach and the ability to get to people, right, this does give us the ability to, I'm looking at the participants today in the Zoom. Some of you haven't seen Pat Krishak in like 20+ years, but here we are, thanks to digital collaboration. Like I'm not coming to Lancaster until you come to Baltimore. Like That wouldn't have happened. So there is an upside. And the last piece I would just say to you is, you are changing, right? You are changing. Your values are changing. What we care about, it matters. And so this idea of appreciating adversity, it's hard to get me in a conversation about any of this without talking about something that is front and center for me, which is birth and death. And so, I love this book. I did a conference on death 3 months before the pandemic, not because I saw it coming, just total coincidence. And I think, Dr. Dan Engel, who is someone who I've been really loving his stuff, he wrote a book called A Dose of Hope. He has a line, he says, nothing gets us current like death. It's like, if you knew that you only had 3 years left, how would you live your life, right? Probably a little different than if you knew you had 30 days left. Probably a little different than if you knew you had 7 days left, right? And the thing with humans, there's another great book called The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, which is like, we deny it. We deny it all day. It's how we operate, hurling on a rock through the universe right now as sort of brothers and sisters. But when you think about, again, I know this is hot and heavy for a digital collaboration conversation around death, but like, to me, death is a way to get current with what matters most. And so this book in particular, by the way, was done by a nurse who was a palliative care nurse, and she interviewed 1,400 people at the end of their life and summarized their biggest regrets. And I love number 2, as we're talking about digital collaboration. Because I can assure you, no one at the end of their life is going to say, man, I'm really glad I was great in all those Zoom meetings, and I was really great with all this Slack. Like, I get it. I get that it doesn't carry the same weight. But what I will say, and again, I'm just using my and our sort of shift life experiences to bring these to you. And I hope that some of these are helpful and some of these get you thinking. Some of these are like, hopefully heart opening or stir souling, and this one is sort of my last little nod to death, which is, this guy was a very important part of our, sort of journey at Shift. Me personally, he was the CEO of John Hancock. We did 7 years of work with him. He tragically passed last year. And he used to say this to me all the time. He's like, are you going to be bigger than the moment, or will the moment be bigger than you? And I'm just going to say, team, digital collaboration doesn't feel like the most important thing until I look at your job description, many of you, your executives, your entrepreneurs, and your leaders. And you can look at this as like a throwaway. Oh, I got to email better. I got a better cadence. I got to find a way to do asynchronous collaboration. I got to find a way to use tools differently, or Notion, or all these other things that are coming out. And to go, yes, and you got to find a way to show up and be a digital leader. And what does that digital leadership mean to you? And how are you thinking about that? And so to me, one of the ways to think about, that leadership and how it shows up is, I don't think a lot of folks have really, one of the reasons we're going to talk about burnout today around collaboration and why people are so like literally pouring from an empty cup. They're showing up and they look terrible. They don't seem like they're on the edge of their seat. They're on the back of their seat. They're just trying to figure life out. They're like, here we go again. Groundhog's Day, no pun intended, on February 2nd. Here we go again, another meeting. Someone's going to talk. I'm going to try to take some notes, and then we're going to run to the next one without a lot of time. And so what I would say is, we all get a chance, most of us on this call, to think about what is the mandate, if you will, for what your day should look like. And so I again, for every person that looks at this and goes, I don't have time to talk about what my perfect day is, what my less than perfect day is, because it doesn't matter. And I go, well, then this is not the right conversation for you. Because to me, what is your perfect day? I can tell you what my not perfect day is. My not perfect day is starting out at 6 a.m. doing emails. It's doing Slack messages. It's what it used to be, which was like hurrying up and doing a couple videos for social media. It's like spending more time doing that than like actually authentically connecting with people. Another thing that does not make a great day for me is back to back meetings. And yet sometimes I let it happen. And so what I would say to you, if you guys are willing to explore this with me for about a minute or two, which is just get out a piece of paper and a pen, and I want you to think about, if you had to design the ideal day, like, how would you feel? Would you feel at the end of the day like depleted, depressed, divorced from the things that make you a human? Like when you're about to go be with the people that you supposedly, and I say that with love, you love the most? Or are you leaving your office, leaving your home office with this sort of like frown that needs to be turned upside down? Like, how are we showing up? And I think this is a conversation from a digital collaboration perspective that we're seeing a lot of lift, Because a lot of us just didn't think about this because we were walking through the pandemic, hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, figuring things out. Well, look, it's time to figure things out and make them better. So here's what we're going to do. I would love for you to think about what a perfect day looks like. The 5 things that make a perfect day. It could be about your wellness and health. It could be about your family. It could be about your friends. But I also want you to make sure that you spend some time thinking about your work day. What would a perfect day look like? And this includes how you would start the day, right? For me, routines are really important, whether it's my morning routine, getting up at a, used to say 4 a.m., Larry Letow, you and I were the 4 a.m. club. I remember, right? I'm a little slowing down here in my older age going, all right, I think I need those other 2 hours to sleep, right? But as I think about like, what are the ways that I want to start the day, right? What are the ways I want to end the day? I don't know about you, but it's odd to me that, 40,000 people die every year in car accidents. And then when you think about how many people will drop out of the plane or out of the sky in planes, it doesn't happen a lot because of checklists, because of order, because of a real clear process of how they take off and how they land. So the question is, how are you taking off and landing your day? What are the things that make a perfect day for you? And if you had to design that ideal day, week, and month, I want you to spend a couple minutes doing that. And we're going to put you back into groups for about 7 minutes. And I want you to collaborate and talk about, most specifically, what makes up a perfect day for you? What are the emotions? And then what makes up a less than perfect day? And for the record, in case you haven't gotten with the actual agenda of the program, this entire conversation, the deck, the discussion, is what you should take to your teams. Like, this is the conversation. Take it all. Take every one of these little quips, these bits, because I bet I'd be willing to bet $1 with anybody on the team that not a lot of people are starting to think about, how do I recreate this new version of me that's going to work physically, digitally, and somewhere in between. So I'm going to give you 7 minutes. We're going to do breakout rooms again. And let's see what you come back with. Your ideal day, what's a perfect day, and what's less than a perfect day. Miss Julie? So we tried it again to put you in a group of some amazing human beings. Are we 0 for 2 with anyone right now? Maybe no, Liz? Was everybody good? You sure? I looked at your group. There were a couple sus, as the kids will say, a couple sus folks in your group. Just flexing on my new language from my 12-year-old daughter. I'm seeing if it's working out with any of you right now. So anybody have something to share that would be interesting for the group, just in terms of how you're thinking about a better ideal day, or to kind of get to a place that this is not such a chore or a hassle, just to kind of open it up to the group in kind of a free-for-all kind of way?
I don't know if it's, for me, Joe, is the night, I was telling this in the group, the night before, I try to say, what are my 3 goals for the next day?
Yeah.
And, if I hit them, that's great. That's a great day, right? They can be simple. They don't have to be. And if I don't hit them, then it just, hey, look, I didn't hit them. The next day, maybe I have 4 goals, right? But you're always just, for me, it's always about advancement.
Yep. Yep. Well, and I think one of the things I bet you do, Larry, too, and again, I'm just like, it's been a minute since we talked, but the idea that, how many of us feel like the idea of being always on is exhausting, right? Sure. Digitally, right? And so, you don't have to throw a rock in Google to go find a study that says, find a way to get those 3 things done, but to not always be on. Like, find a way to, even like when you look at the phone, even when you look at it with its face down, it's causing a distraction. I mean, they're even saying texting and driving. I got a lot of heat on Twitter for this, but it's what the math says, which is drinking and driving and texting and driving, there's not a lot different. And just for a second, when we're talking to people, right, virtually and digitally, now we're talking about scheduled conversations in sync that we're doing right now, it's incredibly important that you are like looking into the camera, right? You're not spending time looking at your own face. Misty talks a lot about this, of like, are you willing to hide your self-view so that you can give your energy, your focus, your presence to the people that you're speaking with, right? As another sort of piece. Does anybody else have something that you think might be interesting to share with the whole group?
I can go real quick. So Alani in our group had mentioned making chicken noodle soup for a friend, during the workday, during a time where she had not a lot of, it was sort of focused on elsewhere, not just her regular agenda. And she tries to make time for, her zero time, I think she referred to it as. And so when you're not having a perfect day, you sort of look at how can I make things better? And a lot of times, doing something small for someone else, as she had mentioned, all of a sudden turns your mindset completely around, and it sort of can turn it into a perfect day, if you will. So just sort of how to cope with when you're feeling like you're not having that perfect day, doing something small for someone else.
For those who don't know, I know Brendan and his firm, and certainly his partner pretty well. And I will just say that that's a great one to pull out. The second piece I would just say too is, like, we're all sitting here. How many of you have things that are hanging chads, loose ends that have not been tied up? Maybe someone who's sitting in your Slack, your Teams, your text, your emails that needs like a quick thank you, like an acknowledgement, like a quick one, right? Or maybe someone who ran a meeting yesterday in your company and you haven't said like, great work. I'm not gonna post her specific Slack message to me, but one of our teammates at Shift sent me the sweetest note before all of this, which is like, hey, you're the kind of person that does this. You're the kind of person that does that. Like, no one knows this better. Like, and we just started working together, and like, it really made a difference. So for a second, we got 46 people sitting on the Zoom. Like, imagine if we sent out for the next 30 seconds, 46 nodes of appreciation, of recognition, frankly, of a little love. I know it's a little weird to talk about love, but we're gonna do it for a second. Like, find somebody in your contacts, find somebody in your text, find somebody in your Slack right now, and just acknowledge them. Like, acknowledge what they did yesterday, acknowledge or recognize how they showed up. Maybe you see them working through their working through. But from a collaboration perspective, the reason I talk about schedules is, like, I save that time at the end of my day. Between 5 and 5:30, I go, gosh, who haven't I seen? Who haven't I heard? Who haven't I understood? Who haven't I valued? Who haven't I appreciated? Like, how can I end the day with some gratitude? Not just for me, but also for them, right? Don't you guys remember when we used to show up to an office, we'd high five each other? Don't you remember that? Like, we'd feed off each other's energy. Misty, our COO at Shift, talked about this, of how special 1407 Street was, which is our office in Baltimore. Like, how amazing it was, like a home, right? There was all this sort of bustling energy, and it was inspiring, and you're walking past people and they're doing this and they're doing that. Like, folks, we're going to get into this in the next couple sections of, like, what are we really missing as humans as it relates to this? Because it's a big part of who we are. And yet here we are, most of us sitting either in a work office or a home office, and we're not really together. We're together in these like 2D faces and screens, but we can't feel each other. And so as we enter into this next piece, which is, okay, we've got the mindset, we've got some ideas. Again, I would invite you to, and I'll have Julie post this now, which is, I have an exercise called the Hour of Power. I've been doing it for 20 years, once a week, which is like, where am I spending my energy, not my time? How am I showing up for the things that matter most? Larry, just like what you said, what are the things that I'm really focused on? And then more importantly, like, how do I make sure I'm not pouring from an empty cup? How do I make sure I'm saving time, for myself, family, et cetera? I think it's an incredibly important conversation as we're going to hit this next piece, which is really going to talk about burnout. How many people are excited about burnout? Say yay. Exactly. All right. So if we're going to talk about collaboration, the digital mindset, I will just share with you. I went back and forth on the content, even as early as an hour before today's session. I cut out about a dozen slides. I thought that you would probably feel incomplete if we didn't spend more time on tools, technology, and training. We didn't really spend a lot more time on virtual, but I will just share this with you. If I had another hour with you, which some of you remember this was scheduled for 3 hours, and then the team asked me to think about the irony of scheduling a meeting, asking people to digitally collaborate for 3 hours, and I surrender. They were correct. I was wrong. So we're going to fly through these next couple sessions in the next hour. So buckle up. There's a lot of content. Culture. I don't know if you guys know this. We care about culture. It's been a conversation at Shift for 20 plus years, which is, how do we build healthy and high performing environments? I think you have no further to look than this gentleman here. Yes, sadly, he also passed a few years ago, Tony Hsieh, the CEO of Zappos. I like to tell the story, not just of how I met him and how amazing I think he is, but I think in a lot of ways, the story that does not get told is that Zappos beat Amazon. And they did it with a shoe, one SKU. Amazon had all of these things it was selling, and Zappos simply sold a shoe. And Amazon bought Zappos for $1 billion cash, which, by the way, it rarely does. And it did that because, Zappos figured out two things I think really well, which was, I think, yes, their strategy was amazing, but they were really good at extending that strategy to their employees and to their customers. The problem with talking about Zappos right now is that it's not, since the pandemic got going, we've all been looking for these one size fits all solutions. So how many of you remember, we're going to do hybrid work forever. We're going to do virtual forever. We're going to go back to the office. No, we're going to go back to hybrid. No, we're going to do 3 days instead of 2. We're going to do no meetings Friday. No, we're going to go back to the office. We're all dealing with, and I would just offer this to you. There is not, if there were ever a moment that this is not a one size fits all. I got a text message from, a dear friend who happens to be on this call today. And she's like, listen, my organization is thinking about how do we do remote work better? Are we going to talk about that? And I said, yeah, and this is not a one size fits all. Our job today, I think our opportunity, all of us, is to take in what we're hearing and find out what's going to work best for each of us. Because again, the dissonance that we're dealing with is this: 41 versus 85% of employees versus leadership who believe that they collaborate across the organization easily. Folks, it's a massive blind spot right now in most leadership positions that think everything is awesome, like that Lego movie, when employees are not feeling that at all. One little piece around this, I wrote an article about a month and a half ago about how many of you are tired of Zoom meetings, and not just Zoom meetings, back-to-back Zoom meetings. And if you need a picture to be worth 1,000 words, this is your brain on Zoom. This is not, for those who remember the after-school commercial about drugs and all that other good stuff, okay? So we just know that taking breaks is incredibly important. But the problem is, most of us know that we should eat better. Most of us know that we should stop smoking. Most of us know that sugar's bad. Most of us know that TikTok brain is a thing, right? We're mindlessly scrolling and scanning and skimming. We have access to the world's supposed best information and collective intelligence. And what are we doing? Watching YouTube videos all day. Right? And right now, it is an absolute epidemic of burnout sitting inside of organizations. And I take no credit for this next couple of pieces. One of our executives at Shift, his name is Andrew Friedman. These are his slides. He helped sponsor a global burnout study last year. We care about whole self, well-being, the whole idea of being healthy and high performing, but there is a real interesting phenomena that continues to happen, which is it's like this chronic work stress that does not get successfully managed. And I love this down here. It's characterized by feelings of energy depletion, exhaustion, increased mental distance from your job. Again, these are the things that were troublesome before the pandemic got going. They've only exacerbated themselves now. And the data is really, really clear. So Julie, if I could ask, we've got a great webinar on this that I would say is about an hour long. I would highly encourage you to have your organization take a look at it. There's a lot of really good things in there in terms of how do you help burnout, but I'll give you a couple of the key slides right here. So first, this is what's creating burnout in your digital culture. One, that we as human beings have that resistance. We're not good at novelty. We're not good at new. So to the best of your ability, how are you helping people assimilate, absorb, and acknowledge the new? I will tell you, I have a tendency to run right to second and third base when we're trying something new and not think about the change management of it, not think about the introduction of it. So for example, I recently launched an AI Slack channel inside of Shift because, I have a tendency to do this. I started using ChatGPT about 2 or 3 months ago. I'm like, oh my gosh, this can help us save time. And I just started posting a bunch of stuff about it. And people were like, wait a minute, what are we doing here? Wait. I know we have AI in your platform, but how does this fit? And so again, I think it's really important for us to unpack how are people assimilating new information. The second is unpredictability. There are a lot of businesses right now still going through it. And I think you're seeing this sort of Patagonia vest recession within the big tech sector. What you're not seeing is that there's still 10 million open positions right now. It is a mixed bag of what's going on in the workplace right now. There's a lot of folks who, when they see these new things, they get a little flustered, and they should. Work is personal. And when people don't feel like they have a sense of control, it impacts all of these things: behaviors, mood. So when we think about digital collaboration, a lot of conversations, again, sort of seep to, well, what tool's better, Slack or Teams? Or should we be using Rike, Asana, Monday, or Basecamp? Or do you like Culture Amp? Do you like 15.5? Do you like Lattice? Or do you like some of the other cool tools that are out there? And I go, look, the tools are great. Just like diets and gyms are great. But at the end of the day, it's the person driving towards that result that's incredibly important. Now, here's a quote from an employee. Now, when the pandemic first got going in March of 2020, we decided to just start listening as history was unfolding. And I will tell you, I look at this quote all the time because this was in April of 2020. April 2020. This is how people felt. Since I was physically not at work, some of my coworkers and managers give me more work because they can't see me and how much work I'm currently doing. We're undervaluing this as it relates to collaboration, folks. So to me, the invitation is the role of the leader right now. This is going to, again, get into some real tactical things that I hope are helpful. It's not going to feel like digital collaboration, but I'm telling you this, we're watching unlock a lot of value. One of the clients that we work with right now happens to be a big global SaaS publicly traded company. They put things in space. And as we've been clarifying what the leader's role is supposed to look like, it's the idea of creating a barrier-free work environment. Now, when we did this before the pandemic got going, it was like easy because barrier-free usually meant physical things. But now the question is, how does this show up as digital? And so I would say if I could stop the music, like scratch the record and like really drive this particular point home, it would be now, which is one of the hardest things that organizations are struggling with. We would normally say communication, 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 communication. I would say one level under that, though, is clarity. So just check out some of these stats Microsoft published about 6 months ago. Employees who have more clarity, 4 times likely, more likely to stay at their company for at least 2 years, 7 times as likely not to look for a new job, 4.5 times say they're more happy at their current company. And so the question to be asking isn't just about your vision, your mission, your purpose and values. That's not today's conversation. It's also not about your company's OKRs, your company's big rocks, your company's metrics of success. Every person on this call, I'm going to just take a leap of faith and say this, which is you probably are really good at coaching. You probably have stuff to share. You're probably like a great guide. You're a Sherpa of your own experiences of like the how do we traverse this new terrain. You've probably been entering into this because you're here today. Like you've got some humility, but you also have some probably really strong intuition. You trust that gut brain that we talked about an hour ago. So here's my question. Can you activate said gut, your intuition? And I want you to answer the question of what stories and strategies do you wish everyone at your organization knew? And think about this. Now that we are in this world of like instant information everywhere, but you know this, there's probably things that your company did during the pandemic that new employees starting aren't going to know. There's probably things that your company was founded on that new employees aren't going to know. What are those things that are key, legendary tales, stories about character and honor and integrity? What are those? Second question, what are just the things that you know are good to be in the know? So if you have an organization, let's say of 300 people, how many of the 300 people really know the top 5, the top 10, whether it's stories of the past or stories of the future? And the second piece of this, it's like, who are the people that you wish your team knew more of? Right now, we're not knowing who's on our team. We're not wearing the same jerseys because we're not showing up all at the same place at the same time. 3 million years of evolution of being social creatures, collaborating in hives. That's what we've been doing. Now, digitally, how do we do this in like a networked 5D, time, space, doesn't sort of all connect? How do I know who's on my team? I don't know if you've ever heard this before, but you likely have. Birds of a feather flock together. And a lot of times in education, we teach the C student. We carry that forward into management and leadership. The question is, who are the A players on your team that if everyone knew who they were, you'd get a lift? You wouldn't need a big stump speech. You wouldn't need to go out and do some big change program, because you simply let people see who are the A's, who are the people that embody the values, the vision, the voice, the way that you want to travel through this organization, and how do you unlock who those people are? So I would normally sort of stop the record, let us do another little breakout session here, but I'm gonna cook through some of this content. But I will say that these two questions have been helping so many organizations that we've been working with. Because instead of some intervention from the outside, look, we've been doing this for a long time. I've been, asked to come into companies, help fix this, help fix that, help us find the shovel, help us dig the hole, help us do those things. And I will tell you, a way to build more sovereignty and competency in your organization right now, and it is definitely not to my benefit, is to tell you that the answers lie within your organization. Your job is to reveal what is already true. Help people see what they just can't see. Help them feel what they just haven't felt yet. Give them that gift. Give them that gift of clarity. And again, from a digital collaboration perspective, you could have a person or two who just kills it. They seem to have a great flow. They seem to have a great process. When's the last time that person was recognized in front of the team? Help that person unpack it. Do a lunch and learn, right? And if you want to take this to a different conversation of not just being so fluid and flexible, some of you have seen this before. I see some smiles. Andrew Friedman wrote an amazing book called Thrive that really talked about how do you get to this level of detail in terms of role excellence. Now, what I'll tell you is this methodology has been around for decades. We've been the beneficiary of a lot of really smart people that we stand on the shoulders of. But like companies like Microsoft, 20% of their team lives by this role excellence philosophy, which is how do you really define, back to clarity, what are the expectations that we have of people? More than that, that's right. I see somebody like, wait a minute, wait, you're going to get access to the deck. But these next 3 slides, I would just say, are screenshotable. They're conversations that I would have, not just with your HR team. So, we love HR. This is not about HR. This is about you. If you have a team of people, these are questions that must be answered. The environment and systems, these are questions that must be answered. Rewards, recognition, and consequences, these are questions that must be answered. Now, all of a sudden, up to, we're 72 minutes into this conversation. Everything I've talked about is an add. Everything is an addition to. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is another issue with digital collaboration, which is we keep adding to the plate. And so if some of you feel like you're spinning 17 plates, you are, because you haven't figured out how to Marie Kondo. How many of you know Marie Kondo? She wrote an amazing book called The Secret Art of Tidying Up, right? And so she would simply say, what are the things you need to kill? What are the things you need to lose? What are the things we need to delete? What are the things we need to stop? What are the things that no longer bring us joy? And so when you think about what are some of the outdated rituals, routines, practices, and processes that you need to shed, I will just, again, open up with a quick story, which is, I was in California 2 weeks ago. One of our teammates gave me a Slack, said, hey, when you get a chance, can you give me a call? I called her up and she said, hey, so we've got this platform, Latch. We use it to get everyone on the same page without scheduling more meetings. She's like, but do you find it a little ironic that we still do a Monday morning huddle? And I was like, I don't know. We've always done it that way, and it feels good. And I like starting the week with everybody's energy. And we used to do one at the end of the week too. And she said, look, no offense, but it would be great if we started to think about that different. It's a big use of time. And right now the team needs their time back. So team, I'm like a meeting junkie. I love meetings. I'm a weirdo. I love getting people together. I love gathering. I love learning. I love experiencing things together. I love co-elevation, co-creation, give it a name. I love it. But at the end of the day, if I'm going to effectively digitally collaborate, it means I've got to listen to not just the voice, but really the vote of our team. And so what I would love for you to do, if you guys are down for it, which is in the chat, what are the things inside of your organization right now that you can strip away, that you can almost create a kill list? What are the things that we're no longer going to do because it's not giving us the maximum output that we need to get to? And I will tell you, we're carrying a lot of legacy, folks. The legacy is what's preventing the collaboration. The legacy is what's causing, in some ways, the burnout. Anybody want to share a few ideas of just some easy things that you can think about killing, whether it's meetings, whether it's practices, anything come to mind? Staffing meetings tend to be a big one. Look at how many meetings Liz wants to kill back to back. I love it. I love that, Larry. No agenda, no attenda is what I've heard before, which is kind of a cute way to say it. Default to 30 minutes instead of 1 hour. It is an odd thing. I think 30 years from now, people are going to look back and say, so let me get this straight. You guys just emailed all day. That's what you spent your time doing. 30% of your day was just emailing to someone's request that came in at the last time, and you answered them as they came in, not in the priority they came in or not the priority they should be. Totally agree. Back-to-back meetings got to go. So back to that, designing your ideal day, your ideal month, your ideal week, your ideal quarter. You should really think about what are those boundaries and how do we put them in place. Now, what I will say to you is this. Most leaders are down for this. Most leaders love this conversation. They love it for their team, but they won't be willing to do it for themselves. Okay. And so the invitation here is, I think some of the best change management moments are what I would call caught, not taught. It's just people modeling the way and living it every single day so that people can see that. And then they can decide, hey, what works for them? Because at the end of the day, you do have, as executives, the ability, these are great, by the way, you do have the ability to start thinking about, like, what does the week what does the rhythm of the week look like? And so I would just start to think about the energy of the week. How do you want to manage it? For example, on Fridays at Shift, we've been doing this for easy 10 years, which is Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. Look, I've never worked corporately, so I don't have the same thing that some of you have, which is this experience of on a Friday, pretending to work from 3 to 5 p.m. every Friday. Like I don't have that. I've not ever done the pretending to work. Everybody that I've generally talked to, if we're just going to get real honest with each other, Friday, I'm talking Fridays, guys, afternoon from 3 to 5. Don't tell me a fib. We're not doing highly productive, high yield output time. So we decided to put a block on everybody's calendar, Friday from 3 to 5 p.m. called Better You Time. And the idea was for everyone to end the week with one investment in themselves. Go take a walk, go sit under a tree, go read a poem, go do some yoga, go do a workout, go get a massage, go to therapy, which is what I do. Go do something that fills your cup up so that when you get to the weekend, guess what? You're not the last or afterthought. You are the thing that you sort of fed coming into the weekend so that you can be super mom or super dad or super uncle or super aunt or whatever it is that you are. That is a big feature of our rhythm of the week. The question is, how have you designed your rhythm of the week? And instead of doing it based on your priorities, I would say do it based on the energy of how you want people to show up. When you want meetings, when you're going to give people time to work. Because right now we're spending a lot of money without even knowing it because we're asking people to show up to meetings that are not moving the needle. And look, the other piece of this isn't just about killing things. It's also about having conversations that are not easy to have. They weren't easy to have in a physical sense. And so, you can't be too honest right now with yourself or with people. You just got to learn how to make it safe. And so you can talk to almost anyone about anything as long as it's safe. So start with, just the real basics of this, of mindset. Like understand, do you know what triggers the people that you work with? Like I will tell you, recently, about 6 months ago, I was working with one of our teammates and, this person was like, hey, it's just too much digital, too many platforms, too many places to check into. And I was like, okay, great. Now we know, right? We've got one of our clients right now. I'll get to this when we get to digital communication, but he's putting at the end of his emails, if you are still reading this email, Joe Koff, just respond that you can have this $500 token I want to give you. And his last couple emails, no one's responded. I'm going to talk about that in a second because you think people are reading your emails. They're not. And beyond not reading emails, it's about, again, how we show up from a collaboration perspective. So a lot of these things you guys have talked about, I would highly encourage you to take a screenshot of this one. Which is like, do you understand what people really want before they go? They call them stay interviews. If you want effective, healthy, just think about it this way. If you have a significant other, if you have a best friend, if you have just someone that is your person, isn't it interesting that you open up the conversation that anything is possible when everything's on the table? anything. If we're good in our relationship, there's nothing we can't do. Well, folks, this needs to be applied to a work situation, which is like, if we're not good in the relationship, then there's conversations that we need to have, and they're likely to feel like these kind of stay interview conversations. And I will also encourage you to think about coming up with a digital workplace manifesto. Candidly, we're working on ours at Shift. We do not have these ironed out yet. Misty, I grabbed this one early this morning, and I thought it was like a really good one, which is like, in the same way that you would have a workplace manifesto about the way that you work. The question is, do you have one around your digital place? Like, have you put out the sort of the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution? Like, what are the tenets, the principles, the guidelines, the guardrails, the parameters of how you are asking people to show up? If you have not made the implicit explicit, we're going to have a really big challenge collaborating with people digitally. So back to getting people on the same page without scheduling more meetings, it takes a little bit more energy to figure out, like, well, what does this mean in terms of how we're working? And if you nail this, we've been showing these stats for 20 years, 26% less turnover, 4 times higher growth rate. Like, the stats, the data from Gallup, from Gartner, all these places that look at the best companies that figure out the culture piece, they seem to perform a little bit better. So the question to me to land on here for today, just on the digital culture, we've got 2 pieces left, is what can the organization count on you for? And so I want you to, we're going to do this as a group exercise in the chat again. Really think about this. Like, what does the organization count on you specifically for in terms of your leadership? Is it your vision? Is it your values? Is it your strategy? Is it your basket weaving ability? Is it the fact that you know 4 languages and you can decipher really hard puzzles? Is it the fact that you value visibility and you're always on because you want to make sure that people feel supported? Like, what are the top 3 things that your organization can count on? Because digital collaboration is a fancy way of saying being a good teammate. And I've played football with a few of you sitting on the Zoom here. What's up, Ryan? And so I remember when you do this, it's a real simple thing, which is like, if you want to be a good teammate, people have to know what they can count on you for. There has to be that level of conversation. So go ahead and put in the chat, what can people count on you for? And for the record, if you see someone who's got a good one, you're allowed to swipe it for today, okay? And so as we're doing this, you know, do this collectively, because there's a lot of really smart and amazing human beings sitting on the call today that I will tell you could have easily taught or had a portion of today's conversation, because we work with you. We know that you get digital collaboration, you get digital leadership, you get that there's an etiquette, there's almost like a new dress code digitally of how are we showing up in the workplace when it's so virtual. And so there's some really great ideas there. Awesome. I love that, Kathy. All right, it's my transition slide. I couldn't find a person, so we decided to do a little virtual piece there. So digital communication, all right? So we're rounding out home, folks. There's sort of 2 last sections. When we think about digital collaboration, you know, communication cannot be obviously something that we miss. So we think about, it takes changing your mindset, approaching this as it's not happening to us, but for us. It's not a have to do all of this, it's a get to do this. It's understanding how we show up in our calendar and our routines and managing our energy. It's also being really clear. Digital culture is about clarity. You know, it's Brené Brown says it best. Clarity is kindness. Making the implicit explicit is what Adam Grant, Simon Sinek, all these really great thinkers and leaders would talk about. Now, it's about how do we actually communicate back and forth. And what I will tell you is, this was a slide that I remember getting right as the pandemic got going, which was, you know, it's drawn not quite to scale, but it's the exponential rate of Moore's law, this accelerating rate of change. It's this idea that, you know, computers and all the different things have been sort of changing at an exponential compounding rate. Okay, that's the purple line. The blue line is us monkeys. Just for what it's worth, we are monkeys, right? We are chimpanzees. We just got out of the trees not so long ago. And if that's offensive, I'm sorry, but that really is not all that. When you think about the cosmic calendar and timeline, team, you know, we're the first generation, we think, to experience this much change this quickly. And what's interesting is that the way that we've adapted is not really changed much, except when the pandemic got going, because it started to accelerate, they say, 5 to 10 years of digital transformation. And what you need to understand is that, like, as adults, we have the ability, and some of you know the guy there that's dancing. It's one of my favorite pictures of him. As adults, when it comes to communication, I've been talking about training on this topic a long time. Is that we forget that people are adults. So when we're sitting inside of these organizations that look like pyramids, okay, they look like pyramids. They're structured in a hierarchical sense. That creates an adult to child relationship. We start telling adults where to be, why to be, how to be, when to be. Grown adults with, some of us, college degrees, some of us like lots of life and professional experience. We're still like telling you to clock in and clock out. We're like the proverbial clock in and clock out. And so what I would just tell you is, like, if we zoom out, widen the aperture here a bit. Digital collaboration, digital communication. I think the best way to think about this is communication is not what you say. It's not even what you do, just to start. It's the response you get back. So for example, if you're a parent, if you're sending out, a text to your kid, or you're having a conversation. We had a little bit of a blow up with the kids this morning. One of the kids weren't being kind, and I was like, "Hey, what's going on here?" I can yell, which is unfortunately not proud to admit I did, but that doesn't mean I'm getting the response that I need back. We have one of our clients right now. He threatened in one of his monthly updates that he was going to put at the bottom, "I'm going to kidnap your mother if you don't respond to this email," because he's frustrated, folks. This has not been easy for people. People are really struggling with, particularly CEOs and executives. I know, cry them a river. They make a lot of money. Some of you are here. I'll tell you right now, they do not have the right lightsaber for this moment. Because it's not just the communication, the response you get back. You guys know this. This is my main man, Andrew, by the way. He's the one who wrote Thrive and gave us a lot of that great content that we had coming into this. There was this meme, I hope you've seen it. It was the first thing we started teaching 20 years ago, which is like, how does communication happen? And so I would usually leave out the percentages and like make you guess. Words make up 7% of communication. That is generally, without getting too crazy on the science part of this, just take my word for it. Voice quality. Well, when you're in a room, how many of you could describe yourself as like an empath? Like you could feel the energy of the room or of people. You could sense, believe it or not, that sixth sense is a real sense. It's not like a made up woo thing. It really is. You can get a sense of where the pattern of conversation is going. Well, a lot of that's driven by your voice quality. So if I talk really fast and I keep us moving and I'm like, we got to hurry up, we got to go, we got to go, we got to go. Pace, volume, frequency, tone. Those are really important messages that get sent. Versus if I stop and we slow things down and we have a very hard to pay attention to, slow. Some of you are about to chime off. I'm like, I don't have time for this, right? And then body language is 55%. If you combine voice quality and body language, I'll give a gold star in the chat. Anybody hurries up and tells me what that percentage is, you get a gold star, maybe a book. Maybe we'll send you something. What do you think? Combine those. Someone help me. I'm really good at math. Thank you, Joe Koff. Joe Koff wins. Sorry, Wendy, you were a day late. Maybe a day late, but a second late. So 93% of communication is nonverbal, folks. What's texting and typing? Can someone tell me? 7%. 7%. You are walking into the proverbial gunfight with a knife, texting and typing. It's not going to work if that's the only way you're doing this. So listen, some of you are hybrid or remote first, and I get it. But remember, I love this quote from George Bernard Shaw, which is like, the single greatest illusion is that communication is taking place. And I will tell you, this is a big one. Stop assuming. Go back to what I said before. Communication is a response you get back. 93% of communication is nonverbal. So the question is like, well, is there an upside to like digital versus in-person communication? And I'll give you a couple. The difference, obviously, this nonverbal cues, it's a big thing. And so I've said it twice so far in today's discussion. Don't judge behavior as intent. Stop questioning the intent of a text. It's probably not right. How do I know this? Well, we built a platform last year. The commercial's coming later, so don't worry. We built a platform last year and we put AI way before ChatGPT was cool, because we know that the way we listen, we just don't listen so good, folks. And we certainly don't interpret text and typing in a way that really is meant to pick up on the patterns of how people are feeling. So this is a big deal. Asynchronously. So we're going to talk about this very, very hard word to pronounce. But async basically means that in a conversation that we're here today, there's a lot of folks who wanted to show up today. They like emailed me at the last second. I love this part, by the way. So I'm glad that, thank you again, just out of gratitude for you being here today. But we get about half of the people that sign up for these conversations. It's weird to me, half. Now it's free. People don't have skin in the game. Shit comes up. I get it. But you know, the idea that, well, I'm just going to assume or consume this later. I love that. Because what are they going to do? They're going to get past my second slide where I said, all of a sudden, the only thing that happens when you listen, like if you listen to a podcast and you're mowing the lawn, you're picking up less than 10%. Folks, it's really important to engage in the conversation. Number 3, there's a permanent record. This is like another PSA. Folks, anything that you say or do or write or whatever, it's going to be a permanent record, likely, should be the assumption that you make. Sometimes it's anonymous, but I will tell you the last piece of the difference between digital and physical is, for those who do have a lot to say or do have a lot of connections, it does give you a chance to sort of put your, reach out there in a very different way. Now, this is staggering to me. I've been the CEO of a small company for 20 years. We've worked with 600 organizations over the last 20 years. I can't tell you the amount of times that I've been in a conversation with a CEO and they'll say, I sent out a monthly update and I heard nothing back. I sent out a kudos, didn't get any recognition. And they assume that it's being read. I mean, are you willing to assume that when you send an email, it's being read? Like that seems like a modicum of assumption that we could take and make. Bottom line is that's not what the data says. So I'm gonna give you 3 pieces that are appalling to me. So number 1, the average open rate. These are not marketing external emails. This is not from HubSpot, folks. This is from inside internal communication data. The highest open rate is 100%. Okay, great. The lowest open rate for internal communication, 29%. So the average between those two, they say it's 70%. That's crazy pants to me. So that means 70% of your team is only getting the messages that they're opening up. And by the way, look at the read time. So this is where it gets crazy, 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 crazy. Bananas. So I'm going to jump to the chase here. 45% read it longer than 9 seconds. Congratulations, ladies and gentlemen. You are a digital collaborator because you're sending out notes and messages and Slacks and Teams and all this other stuff. Just so you know, 50% are spending longer than 9 seconds on it. Now, maybe it's a short message and maybe they can read fast. But have you ever typed something that's going to take a little longer than 9 seconds to read? This is what's happening, is that why I start the conversation about your routines and your energy and your time. Like, are you reading the email in between a red light and trying to respond to it? Are you reading the email in between a conversation you're having with your kids and trying to hurry up and get back to people? Or are you actually digesting? Are you metabolizing? And then are you materializing the conversation in a way that takes what the real value of us as human beings collaborating and participating with each other in a way that honors it and receives it and does something with it? Because as we keep traversing this physical to digital, look, it is one of my not favorite things, as much as I love doing this conversation with you guys today. We would have gone 10 times further and faster in person, period. There'd be a lot more interaction. There'd be a lot more conversation. Do you remember that old adage in marketing that if you want to get a buyer, or a person to buy, you got to market to them 7 times, right? You got 7 pieces of messaging. Isn't it interesting that when we think about how effective a Zoom conversation, again, I get the irony here. We're on a Zoom meeting. I'm talking about not doing Zooms. I get all of that. Okay, you got me. But if we're not able to go 10 times as fast, it means that potentially it's going to take 70 times to get the same message out to your team. A couple other things to think about here. I do a lot of work with folks who are, being, whether in front of a lot of people or, CEOs who are in front of the press. We talk to them about smiling a lot. How do you smile digitally? So for those who don't have a good emoji game, it's time to pick up your emoji game. I don't care what decade you were born in. I don't care what person you voted for. I don't care what your favorite emoji is, but you got to figure out what your emoji is. Like I send out 3 or 4 consistent emojis. A purple heart, you can't steal it, by the way, because it's not a red one. So it's not romantic. It's not a green one, which is a little weird to me. It's purple, it's in the middle. It's like a little bit of love. You can steal it if you want. We can just keep sending out purple hearts. You can send out the thank you emojis, or the thumbs up, or the muscle one, or the fist bump, or the hand clapping, or whatever it is, but you've got to find a way. Thank you, Wendy. Everybody put in the chat your favorite emoji that you can find. Let's see if we got some good ones here. But this is a big one. Thank you, Julie. I love the rocket. Rocket sends you to another place too. Diane, I'm not sure what that is, but that's fine. Lauren, laughing at me. Liz, some claps. You know, you can change the texture and the tone of the skin of the emojis, like all of this stuff. Alana, perfect. Misty's excited. I love it. And so as you think about, again, digital collaboration, there's a lot of articles written on digital emotional intelligence. That's where this slide came from. It was a long form paper about digital emotional intelligence. Now, emotional intelligence is not something that we all studied, most of us. You know, that was a common or a new term in the mid-90s. You know, a guy named Daniel, what was his name? Goleman. Daniel Goleman wrote a book called Emotional Intelligence, and it was really off the work of Martin Seligman around the positive psychology movement. And so it was like, instead of us always studying what's wrong with us, he was like, let's study what's potentially right with us. Look, folks, digital emotional intelligence is going to be something people are going to be talking about for the next couple years, maybe the next 10 years. So get a head start on what is the way that you're showing up from a digital communication standpoint. Now, I'll give you a couple other real quick things to think about. So as you're communicating with people, there's generally a point. Are you trying to inform them? Are you trying to influence? Are you trying to innovate, get them to think differently? Are you trying to inspire them so that they can find the answer within themselves? Or are you just trying to have a good conversation and have some impact on people? Okay. As it relates to informing people, these are the 4 questions I always think about when I'm trying to send information out. What's the point? What are we trying to accomplish? Why? And how will we know this is successful? Those tend to button up the notions of clarity when I'm attempting to communicate and inform people. When we're talking about influence, this is the single most used framework I have ever used personally as it relates to speaking, teaching, training, or having a discussion, which is starting out with what's the point? Why is this important? Sound familiar from today, by the way? Like, what's the point? Get everybody on the same page without scheduling a meeting. Why? Burnout, engagement, dissonance, resistance to change. How did we find this out? We studied 30,000 people. Why does this matter? Because we're all digital leaders. What are the mistakes? Not being responsive. What's the solution? Thinking about your mindset, thinking about the way that we maybe clarify what's important. What are the next steps? We're going to talk about that today. What are the do's and don'ts? So you can see that I'm following literally this framework today, but this would be really helpful because it's how we as humans think about influence. This one is totally taken by one of my mentors. His name's Steve Lashansky. I love these. It's not just innovation, it's also just alignment. Do people understand how decisions are made in your organization? People always talk about communication in terms of response you get back, or my tone, or my voice quality, or the contents of the conversation. But really the underpinnings of good digital collaboration is how are we making decisions? Do people understand, is this a consensus, a majority vote? Is this just your, play to run? Or are we gonna have a conversation and we're gonna figure it out together? I tend to find that this is something that we all sort of skip over or miss. And I think it's a big one, which is how are decisions being made in the organization? What's the timing of those decisions? In fact, we spent some time last week with one of our clients, and I have noticed this, maybe you noticed this too, which is the world on the outside of the organization seems to be running at 120 miles an hour. But the speed on the inside of an organization is only running at about 60. And everybody's like, wait a minute, I feel like I'm behind. I feel like I can't keep up. I feel like the race is, it's not anything more than the speed in which you're making decisions. So I'll give you one last little unlock here on this. Instead of feeling like you always have to make the decision permanently, just make the decision for now. Say, hey, this is the decision we're going to make for now. Imagine if our government, all the love in the world to them at some level, right? Some of them during this last 3 years, like they were like, get in the house, put on a mask, hurry up and get the vaccine, don't get the vaccine, do this, do that. If they had just ended every one of those little press release statements with, this is what we know for now. This is what we're doing for now. We wouldn't have gone, why do you keep going back and forth? Why do you keep changing your mind? We would have gone, oh, wait a minute. Our iPhones, they update themselves 13 to 15 times a year. It's called a software update. Do you know what it does? It fixes bugs. It fixes the things that are broken. It fixes the things that need to get fixing. Funny enough, as human beings, the average adult asks 6 questions a day. The average child asks 125. Folks, it's a big deal. We lose our curiosity. We've got to really sort of step into that. A couple other pieces here quickly, find the clearing, what do you want people to know, feel, and get? That's part of what we talked about today, which is like, I want you to understand another way to think about digital collaboration. I want you to feel inspired when you leave here. I want to make sure that you have actionable insights that you leave with. And then lastly, from a communication standpoint, what can you appreciate? This is sort of if I've got any Kibian, this is for you from a finance perspective. I know this isn't entirely true, but I like to pretend it is, which is like what we appreciate appreciates. Get it? Like the financial piece of appreciate. Okay, well, just for me, like what we appreciate really does appreciate. And I think sometimes we are doing it how it was done to us. So for example, how many of you had a hard childhood or had a hard boss, or like, you're using that as your point of reference and you're giving it to your people or your kids and you're going, they got it a lot easier than I did. Kill that switch, kill it. Because that's not the point. The point isn't to have it a little bit better than you did. The point is, how can it be even better than it is? So being vulnerable, yes, praising people. It actually, the ratio of praise to constructive, direct feedback that might not feel great, they talk about is 9-to-1 digitally. Think about that. How often are you really just, hey, it was great showing up today. Hey, it was great to have everybody there. Now, as it relates to tools, I'm not going to talk about any of them because I'm going to give you the deck. You can go check them out. This is pretty darn self-explanatory, but everything from survey tools to real-time meeting feedback. I'm going to just say this to you, which is when people say they're digitally overloaded, please know this. Organizations that have more than 1,000 people, the employee base has to toggle between 11 to 15 platforms. Unless your organization is toggling between 11 and 15, just remind people they're not going from building to building. They're not going from city to city. I mean, they're toggling with their mouse. Like, this is not, we got to stop with the, not another platform. It's like, no. What's going to help me move the organization forward? I didn't have to shovel a hole today. I had to open up something and God forbid I forgot my password and that's a pain in the butt. But like, I think it's time to put some of this stuff in perspective. I'm running a little short on time. I can't go through my Generation Z came to slay. I'm, again, learning new language, which is really fun from our kids. But again, from a 5 generations in the workforce perspective, this is important. Like, we are melding and mixing cultures. And I think it's important to understand, like, again, if we're going to have a high degree of emotional intelligence, can we read the room? Do we know what their lingo, their language, their Rubicon, the glossary of terms? Like, that's a really good way to sort of get up to speed. Couple other things, and again, I'm going to sort of pick up the pace here just a little bit. These are things that work for us, understanding people's preferences. I know some people like text and some people like email. I know some people like Slack. I know some people in our organization like to collaborate differently. I know some people like to do walk and talks. They don't like Zoom meetings. It's something I would encourage you to think about, which is like, it's great to see each other's, people, their faces, but it's also great to like go take a walk, get your steps in, and like, let's go have an actual conversation like we used to. Again, considering the right channels, aligning on response time. This one I would star heavily. What's the expectation of a response? This I could have spent an hour on. Just decide what you think it ought to be. Work with the team, have the team come up with it, by the way. That's a great collaborative exercise to go, what do you guys think the response time should be? Have them play it out. You'll be surprised at what they'll come back with. I won't go through each and every one of these bullets from a digital communication perspective, but I would just say again, we've tried a bunch of things at Shift, everything from starting a meeting or week with meetings to ending them, to really being accommodating for people with children, to thinking about, we've brought in, one of our last retreats, we had a guy teach us laughing yoga virtually, which was amazing, by the way. You can put his info in the chat, Gary Ware. We've had people come in and do yoga or just different meditation and breath work. Like, we've got to somehow think about this virtual environment in a lot of ways of how we thought about the physical environment. All right, we're on third base. We're heading home, folks. Finally, digital meetings. So we've got digital mindset, digital culture, get it clear. Digital communication. Remember, more human, not less. More curiosity, less knowing. What don't you know that you don't know? How can you take some of this back to your team? Now, meetings itself before the pandemic were stiff, top down, focused a lot on, I think the person in front of the room. What I love about what happened during COVID, I mean, just for a quick second, the idea that we're sort of sitting here right now and we get a chance to be in a Zoom where each of us have the equal line share on the screen. Like, just because I'm here doesn't mean I get more up in front of the room, right? We get a chance to just be here in the same. In fact, another thing, how many of you are at your house right now? Like, when's the last time you had this many strangers in your house? Right? Like, think about the intimacy of the idea that we're holding meetings in each other's homes every day without even thinking about it. It's mind-blowing to me, right? And so the idea that from a meeting perspective, I think, again, it's just something we can double click on a little bit of like, well, what's different about meetings? How are we thinking about these meetings? And so I wrote a piece that you guys can go check out later in a blog called Why Meetings Will Never Be the Same Thanks to COVID-19. And it just gives you some really quick tips and tricks. I'll unpack a few of these. But look, no one loves in-person meetings like we do. This was a meeting that we ran, the one I told you about, Conference on Death, called Complicated Conversations. It was right before the pandemic. We used to take executives out and do yoga. We actually used to make them walk through Baltimore City carrying lots of heavy things to see how much they could handle. We put executives in the back of police cars in Baltimore City to see really what they could handle. We flipped the script on them. We got spiritual on them. We even let them fight and duke it out. This is actually two CEOs going at it from a fencing perspective that have never held a sword before, kind of a strange thing that happened. We've blindfolded people in meetings. I told you we brought snakes to meetings. We've taught and trained. We've changed the script when COVID, we're like, all right, we all need fancy, cool, like ways to just spruce up the place. If you're looking, by the way, for a little like tile action and just like changing the energy of a meeting, this was from a company called Gaping Void. And we bought these little tiles that were like really important to each of them. And so we had each of the team go out and go buy these things. And it was a really cool way to run the meeting. So how I would think about this piece, if I were you, is this slide is how do you prepare for these meetings digitally when they're scheduled? Why is it a big meeting? What's your best case scenario? What are your biggest obstacles in making this so? So as I thought about, this meeting today and these obstacles, it's like, okay, this is our community of friends, of family, of clients. These are people that I care about. These are people that we've worked with. These are people that I want to learn from. It's like, okay, what are all the funny parts about running a meeting like this? Back to a Zoom meeting talking about digital collaboration, that's 3 hours. Okay, kick it. Let's go down to 2. What are the other funny things? Well, it's like, we haven't done a lot of collaborating today, even though we've done a couple of those sessions. Well, that's a challenge. So maybe we can wrap with a little bit of that before we end. But another way to think about this too, in terms of launching meetings, I have close to 200 meeting opener questions. It's what happens after you do this for 20 plus years of running a lot of meetings, and you don't ever want to tell the same joke twice. You don't want to ever open up the same meeting in the same way twice. I don't know about you guys, but it's almost like you feel like you're an artist, a musician. You got to keep coming up with new content, new ideas, and new things all the time. And I'm hoping that's what you got here today. But opening up a meeting, we did it for 15 minutes of the 2-hour real estate. So we spent 7.5% of this meeting, and that's how we opened up, which is a shared experience. I call it a fuse. It gives us all the same experience. It gets us all in the same place. And yes, I conveniently asked, like, what's holding you back from being present? But these tend to go a really, really long way. One of my other favorite questions to ask is, what's keeping you up at night? How are you sleeping? Like, instead of how are you feeling, how are you sleeping tells you a lot more about how someone's doing than how are they actually feeling. Mapping out the concerns, before the meeting, while you guys got a couple confirmation emails, because I know people don't show up unless you really make it a big deal. During the meeting, great. And then after, we're going to be sending you guys a survey. I want your feedback. What did you like? What would you change differently? Who else do you think needs to hear this? Because one of the things that sort of occurred to us late last year is, as we've been an organization of helping people learn things, since the pandemic, we haven't been doing as much. So, this was really our first, giddy up with inviting a bunch of, again, not super public, not super big, but can we get people who care about what they're doing, who take it seriously, who are looking for a couple actionable insights. Now, if you're really ready to step it up from a meeting perspective, I don't know if you've tried yet, but stepping into the metaverse. This is something that we did about a year ago. This company, Morpheus, is by a buddy of mine. They have an amazing platform. Google, Adobe, Facebook, they're already using this. So I would say if there's like a meeting once a quarter where you want to pull people together in a really amazing way, I'll tell you a little bit more about them in a second, but some of this it feels like a circus trick or a parlor trick of like, okay, we're in this like weird zone. And, if you haven't tried VR yet, I would encourage you to do it. Is it perfect? No. But, as it relates to like giving us a chance to, there was a time where I took the team to the space station. In space is how we started last year's meeting. We were looking back at the Earth. If you guys know that Carl Sagan quote of looking back at the pale blue dot. I thought that the perspective of that we're all in this rock hurling through the universe was kind of cool. Then we went to a cool rooftop bar in Brooklyn like that. And we were sort of just traveling around with each other. And it was like a little weird and it was a little clunky. It wasn't perfect. But again, this is a really interesting way to change up the rhythm of your meetings. Now, we're getting to the end here, folks. And the end is, I think I buried the lead. So on the right side of this, yes, we've talked about the dissonance, the productivity paranoia, but the thing we haven't really hit enough, which is you could leave today's meeting and you would be right in some ways, which is to go schedule a bunch of meetings with your team, right? You're like, I got to give you this content. We're going to talk about these things. We got to change the things up. We got to do it. Just please understand this. They're going to write history books about the fact that we were like teenagers with a credit card on hitting schedule or calendar invites for meetings. 252% more meetings have been scheduled since the pandemic began. That's the mic drop moment. That's it. I'm done. We don't have to talk about anything else. You know what to do right now, which is stop scheduling meetings. Stop over scheduling meetings. Look at the amount of meetings that you're scheduling with your team and think about it this way. Keith Ferrazzi, he's written 15 books. His most famous is called Never Eat Alone. He's become a little bit of a friend and a connection for me. I saw this and I was like, wow, this is it. This is the issue with digital collaboration, which is at the very bottom, when we were see each other in offices, it was serendipitous, casual collisions. I'd see you in the elevator. Don't you remember those like cool conversations walking out to the parking lot? Joe Koff, how many of those have we had, right? Leaving the big HQ. Those were some of the best like meeting after the meetings we ever had. But you've stripped and ripped that away because we're not in person as much. So now we're scheduling in-person, hybrid, and remote meetings. We're doing like 252% more of the next three, in-person, hybrid, and remote. So when I talk about asynchronous, the silent meeting, it goes back to how are we getting people on the same page without scheduling another meeting? Now, I told you there was a commercial coming, and I'm not holding back here, folks. We built a platform for this moment. This is not about you calling us up to have a conversation, but if this spurs your thinking at all, we took 20 years of thinking. We took the company that we purchased and acquired. They had 65,000 people on a platform similar, and we just decided to build this thing from the ground up again and say, how do we fix hybrid work? How do we get people on the same page? How do we get them out of email? How do we get them out of 7% of the communication that's texting and typing? How do we follow adult learning principles? Very simple. Ask people what they're going to do about what they just heard. And at the end of the day, how do we help people listen better? Because we're not listening so well. Now, as we sort of wrap up today's discussion, I'm like remiss if I don't give you, a person that sort of inspires me and has for a while. This is Richard Saul Werman at one of our first big conferences. I couldn't afford to bring him in person, and so this is back in like 2017. We zoomed him into a meeting. It was very strange. At the time, it was like, what are we doing here? Like, he was a little clunky because he couldn't see me, and so then we brought him into that big conference that I told you about. And one of the things that people don't know, so he's the founder of TED, the Big TED. 1984, he found I think one of the best conferences on collaboration, period. He sold it to Chris Anderson in 2004. This guy has written 91 books, 87 years old, 91 books. I don't know how you do that, right? And his framework for innovation and collaboration is what you see over here, which is this acronym ANOSE, ANOSE. So how do we add things? We talked about that today, that adding things is probably not the way out of digital collaboration right now. What does your team need? Stop assuming you know. If you've heard anything I've said today, that dissonance between what you think and what they think has never been wider. How do you go the opposite way, right? The reason I gave Friday 3 to 5 is like everybody's pretending to be working, and that's not, in my experience, really actually happening. So just give them off, go the opposite direction. Subtracting, find one thing. Can we all like give a hell yeah to find one thing you're willing to subtract? Make it a meeting. Give people their time back. Like I'm gonna attempt to give you 2 minutes back before your next meeting. Think about what are the next sort of big ideas that you want to think about. And as it relates to like leaders right now, this is sort of the issue, which is like, you know, we're all trying to navigate these double binds. Gregory Bateson coined this term in the 70s. It was the rock and hard place. How do I make, you know, how do I do the same thing with less resources? How do I do the less that matters more? And as leaders, digital collaborators, I will just tell you, they're all impossible decisions. So please hear me out. This is not easy. This is not sipping tea. You're not going to like magically walk out of here and go, oh my God, I figured it out. I got the answer. I came on down high. Nope, it's not going to happen that way. What's going to happen is like, you're going to have to find a way through of like, you know, what are the ways for me to ask better questions? So start with mindset. Second, start with your culture. 3, start with communication, and then digital meetings and how they're happening. This is an oldie but a goodie. I used to talk about the future of work in 2015 and 16, and I'd show this slide. I was able to get this from a buddy of mine. This is the way we used to work. This is the way it looks. This is the way it's likely to look. And so as we think about sort of the future of work, you know, is this hybrid work a right or a privilege? Look, I don't know about you. It's not perfect. But I want to say this, that we get a chance, folks, to finally not be chained or tethered to a desk. Can we please stop messing this up? Can we please lean in harder to this moment of not having a 52-minute commute each way? Can we find the happy medium between showing up and not showing up? Can we like make something happen out of this moment? Because if not, all the other companies, they're going to just send people back to the office because there's no other way to do it. So that's it. I'm hoping that at this point in the game, you know, you've got the ability to take some of the conversation and some of the, hopefully the content today, and take it back to your organization and say, hey, this is a moment. We had horse poop in London when we figured that out. Can we figure out hybrid work, please? Right? Can we figure out how not to whine and complain about this moment and really sort of lean into what's really possible? So, ladies and gentlemen, we got a podcast, we've got some books, we've got some cool content. There's no hard next steps here in any way, shape, or form. I'll hang out for a few minutes if you want, but I just want to start or end the way I started, which was a big thank you for your time, for your energy, for your focus, for your life force. If you want to like just chime in the chat of like one cool thing you learned today, just to kind of wrap up the meeting and sort of seal up the circle, that would be cool. Or if you want to just jam for a minute, again, I told you, we're not trying to make this polished or perfect. We just want to make this as human as we can. So that's it, folks. Happy digital collaboration, and thanks for joining us.